The following broadcast was produced by the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco as part of our Lighthouse Learning Library.
Our next presenter, Dr. Zachary Shore, the obvious biographical details. He's a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. His students are admirals and generals. How'd you like to teach those guys? He has long thought about 20th century diplomatic history, has at least 8 books on the subject out, spanning all kinds of things from narrow diplomatic to the behavioral and psychological. But that's not why he's here. Zach's here because he's a friend of ours, and he, like all of us, wants to do things in life, wants to go and travel and explore and just be Zach, following what does he want to do, who does he want to meet, and how do you do it using maybe slightly different techniques and certainly a different attitude than many of the folks that you initially start to work with. I'm not going to give away what Zach's going to talk about, but I think it's very interesting as you work with folks in the community to get them to be who they are. And so as part of that, Zach's going to tell us a little bit about who he is and how he gets to be that way. Zachary.
Thank you, Ray. Okay. Thank you so much. Let me just take a quick drink of water. I'll be right with you. There is water right here. Okay. So I just came back from Japan, where I spent a few weeks traveling around, having adventures, gave a few lectures on a new book I have out, and I would love to tell you all about it, but I'm not going to. I've changed my mind. I've actually decided not to tell you about that trip at all, because I want to tell you instead about a very different kind of journey. I want to tell you the story of how I came to be at a place in my life that I was able to just buy a ticket to Japan without any plan and really no idea what I would do or how I would survive, but knowing that one way or another it would be okay. And, you are an easy audience, thank you. Great. Wish my officers and students would be as pliable as you guys.
Different breed.
Yes, definitely. Okay. I think that this story is probably going to be more interesting and meaningful to you, especially because of what you all said last night. That really struck me, because my story really does begin with people very much like you, my orientation and mobility instructors from high school, and my itinerant teacher. I had Mr. Hoff, Mr. Rybicki, and Mrs. Thomas, and they were wonderful, incredibly sweet people. And one day a month, for one afternoon, an O&M teacher would come and take me out of high school and teach me how to see. Essentially, there was something called tracking, and I'm not entirely sure what it was about, but it was to try to help me see better and focus more on things. And they did try to orient me to places that were unfamiliar, which was good. But of course, it was just once a month. There are really only 3 salient memories I have from those lessons over the course of my junior and senior years of high school. The first one was each time I would approach a curb, either coming up from the street or going down into the street, Mr. Hoff would shout, "Clear your area, Mr. Shore! Clear your area!" It was good advice, and nearly 30 years later, I still sometimes hear his voice in my head as I go up and down. Second thing was going out of school when everyone else was in class in Stan Rybicki's sports car, which I now fantasize with some Ferrari convertible, which doesn't exist. But he would put on Knights in White Satin, popping a cassette with a cassette in a cassette deck. That dates me right there. And we would drive around. I'm not exactly sure why that was necessary. But we drove around to different places, and he oriented me there. And every now and then, we would use a cane. And the last memory I have is of the one time that it was either he or Mr. Hoff who actually put me under sleep shades. We went to a very busy intersection, and he gave me my very short cane, and I tried to navigate those streets blindfolded, and I just remember it being extremely scary, and leaving that experience thinking, I really hope I don't lose any more sight, which of course I did lose a great deal more, but that experience left a mark. And so I later went to University of Pennsylvania, and my freshman and sophomore years were extremely difficult because the first thing I discovered is that my one afternoon per month wasn't enough. Surprise, surprise. And I didn't know that. So I spent most of my first 2 years very isolated. So many people have had this experience, right? I didn't want to go places alone. I didn't ever explore new places on my own. At night, when my vision was at its least, I didn't leave my dorm room. And also, because I had asked Mrs. Thomas, my itinerant teacher, if I could learn Braille back in high school, she said, well, she was extremely caring and extremely nurturing. She said, I really think you're too old at this point to learn it. I was 15 when we started our lessons. By the way, I'm using Braille note cards right now as we speak. So. And so as a result, I always used large print books. But my eye condition was such that the strain was becoming severe for the amount of reading needed in college. And so at the end of each day, I had to wear cold compresses on my eyes because the pain was so significant. By the end of my second year, actually by the middle of my second year, I thought I had to drop out. And I told my parents my grades were good. They were not great, but they were good. But the strain was too much, and I couldn't keep up. And they were worried. I didn't really want to leave the university, but I just didn't think I could continue, and I didn't know what else I would do. And then one day, a blind woman I knew, also a student at Penn, said, hey, I just came back from those new shops they opened on Walnut Street. Have you been there? And I was totally stunned because I had been wanting to go to these shops for several weeks, and I kept asking all my friends, let's go together, and they were busy. It just never worked out. And I said, well, who took you? And she said, just me. I went by myself, and I explored it, and she told me all about it. And she was totally blind, and I had to confront that at that moment. My problem was not my blindness, it was my lack of skills and confidence. And so I knew that was the most important thing I had to get. So that was an awakening. And it's a very long and convoluted story to how I ended up at the Louisiana Center for the Blind. But I want to tell you a little bit about my time there. It was a life-changing experience for me, but I want to stress at the outset that I don't believe that every blind person has to go to that center just to get good training. But I do believe, very strongly believe, that most blind people can really benefit from at least the type of intensive training that they offer. So here was just a few of my experiences there that I found helpful. As you may know, everyone there has to wear sleep shades, blindfolds, all the time. 8 to 5 for classes, yes. And then on weekends, whenever we're doing any sort of activity. And the first weekend I arrived was water skiing. And yes. And Joanne, the woman who ran the center at the time, she said, hey, Zach, okay, let's get you out on those water skis. You can go first. Now, being a little hesitant, I figured I'd use a little reverse psychology. Oh, Joanne, I'm really, I've been around water sports my whole life. It's not a big deal. Why don't you have one of the other kids go first, because they are probably nervous about it, and I think it would be good. It would be good for them. It would really be good for them. It would help them. Joanne said, great, Zach's not scared. He's going to volunteer. He's going first. Great. I barely just managed to make it up on the skis at full speed for about half a second. and then went crashing into the water. Unfortunately, a local newspaper reporter happened to be traveling in a boat nearby and snapped a picture of this, covering the story, which he then printed in the Ruston Daily Leader in the next day's paper. There's a picture of me falling into the water, and I think the caption was something like, "Nice try, guy," or something like that. So that was my welcoming to Louisiana. We had in Louisiana 2 hours of Braille every day. 2 hours of cooking, 2 hours of typing and computer skills, and 2 hours of cane travel. And one of the unusual things there is that all of the O&M instructors are totally blind. Again, I don't believe that an O&M instructor needs to be blind. Absolutely, absolutely. In this case, it was very helpful for me for this one particular reason. I had a really nice guy named Paul Lawrenson, who's since passed away. He was a terrific instructor. And I remember on one lesson being out on one of those incredibly steamy Louisiana afternoons, traveling around the town, just the two of us. He said he was going to be away for the Christmas holiday. I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Mexico." I said, "Oh, who are you going with?" He said, "No one. I'm just going for a month by myself to travel around." I was stunned, of course. I couldn't even believe it until he came back and told me all of the stories. And I was so impressed and amazed. And I kept thinking, that sounds like so much fun. I want that. I wish I could do that. I will do that one day. To graduate from the Louisiana Center, you actually have to graduate from each individual course. Oh, sorry about that. Still with me? Good. Okay. You had to graduate from, for example, the cooking course by cooking a full course soup to nuts meal, which you would plan out, you would do all the shopping for 8 people, and then serve it. And then you had to cook a meal for 40 people. Fortunately, that was buffet style. They could help themselves. But I did have to do all the shopping and all the cooking and all the preparation and all the cleanup. They make you do that too. So, but to graduate from travel class, you had to do essentially a scavenger hunt in a city with which you were not familiar. So if we were in Ruston in northern central Louisiana, most people would go to Shreveport or Monroe on a city bus. You're on your own, you're always blindfolded, and you had to come back with a whole set of receipts to prove you had done what you were told to do. So bus tickets to the center of town, and then maybe a Super Ball from Jim's hobby shop and the receipt to prove it, and the Super Ball, and a whole list of things on this scavenger hunt. And that was to get you familiar with really being in a totally different place and knowing you could get around and do it. For my travel route, I chose Baltimore. So I figured I would go by plane, and that would be my first time. I got my sleep shades on before I left Ruston and didn't take them off until I reached my destination in Baltimore and did the same thing on the way back. And when I came back to Louisiana, I was feeling pretty darn good about myself. I was feeling pretty cocky, I have to say. I had a bit of a strut to my step. But then, pride cometh before the fall, yes. There's one more test you have to pass to graduate from travel class, and that is the dreaded drop route. Right, with which many of you are familiar. A phrase, drop route, which strikes fear into the bones of many a seasoned traveler. Let me tell you about that right after this quick drink of water. All right. For those who do not know, the drop route occurs when the sighted staff put you in a car blindfolded and they take you on a circuitous route around town, spinning, zigzagging this way and that so that you have no idea where you are. Then they spin the car around a few times just to make sure you're confused. Dazed and disoriented, they drop you in a crowded parking lot, one of the more difficult areas to navigate. And then your sole task is to find your way back to the Center for the Blind at 101 South Trenton Street, with one small stipulation. You may not ask anything of anyone. You are completely on your own. So, nope, they tell you absolutely nothing. Nothing. So, first you have to use the sun and your watch to tell what direction you're facing. Feel the sun on your face. If it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you must be headed west. And then by a process of deduction and elimination, certain streets in Ruston are only one way going south, but maybe a parallel street a few blocks away might be one way going north. And by that series and other sounds you will hear, the hum of the AC unit at the local supermarket and so on, you must deduce where you are and find your way back. I'm sorry to tell you that I didn't make it. I didn't make it. Still got lost. Okay. In fact, I got so flustered and turned around that I lost my head. I lost my cool. I went out on a long road. I heard busy traffic. I thought I was going a certain way. And after a while, I just got frustrated and I kept on walking until finally a cop car came along and said, "Hey, you're headed out on the highway? You want to come with us?" I can't tell you how hot it is in Louisiana on an afternoon when you're trying to do this and you're out for hours. So I was happy to be in their cop car and come back, but it was a very deflating experience. So the director, Joanne, took me into her office and she said, "Look, you've been to Baltimore, you've been here many months, you've developed the skills. I know you can do this. You failed. You failed this time. But we're going to make you do it again. And you will do it. I know you can do it. And we're going to give you an even harder route next time." And so we did. And I'm very happy to say that the next time I did get it. I did make it better. What I really loved about Joanne is that she made it clear that it's okay to fail. It's just not okay to give up.
Exactly.
Yeah. So back at the University of Pennsylvania, now it's time after a year off, to my junior and senior years, everything went much, much better. Now I could read Braille. I didn't have the eye strain anymore. I felt so much more comfortable socially, more confident. I could go new places I hadn't been before. I explored on my own. I asked people, what is this store? Where am I? Can you tell me what's going on here? And actually interact with people and get information. And also let people know that I'm blind. Now I finally used a cane all the time. And that made it easier for others as well. And we've all had this experience. It's just a liberating experience. And allowed me to move not just through physical spaces, but social spaces with greater grace and ease.
Yes.
So the other thing that happened is I got a 4.0 for the first time in my life. Thank you. I'm sure that was in large part due to all of these things coming together. So, graduating from Penn, I next needed an adventure, and I heard a voice in my head that said, "Go to Seattle." And I said, "But I don't know anyone in Seattle. I don't have anything to do in Seattle." It said, "Don't ask any stupid questions, just go to Seattle." All right, so I went. I had nothing, and I got on a plane, and within a week, I had found a place to live and a job on my first day, actually. The first day, I got on a bus, I went into town, I very boldly and brashly walked into the Seattle Times headquarters, and I said, "I'd like to write for your newspaper." And they said, "Do you have any experience writing for a daily paper?" No. They said, "Could we interest you in customer service?" I said, "Sure. Okay, it's a job. I'll take it." And so for the next year, every morning at 7 a.m., including Saturdays and Sundays, I had the headset on, and I would say something like this: "Times PI circulation, this is Zach. How may I help you?" "My goddamn newspaper isn't here yet, and it's 7:02 in the morning. What the hell's the matter with you people? What are you drinking this morning, Zach? What's wrong with you?" After about a year of that somewhat repetitive job, I knew I had to get out of there, and I convinced myself that I was suffering from a rare neurological disorder which I invented and called cerebrodesiccation. A curious ailment in which one's brain cells slowly dry up and die from lack of use. And then I heard about a once-in-a-lifetime airfare to Australia. It would never be this cheap again. It was an airline that was just starting service from Seattle to Sydney. but you had to go on a particular day. You could only go for exactly these dates, 1 month trip, and I would have to quit my job, sell what belongings I had, and try to raise money to do this. And I knew I had to do it. And I managed to get the very last ticket available. Someone canceled, and I said, get me that ticket. So I wrote a letter to try to raise money, and I think the letter I sent out I explained about the cerebrodesiccation and how I needed a change and all that. But I think the letter began with the line, every once in a while, someone does something so totally spontaneous, so utterly impractical, and so unforgivably irresponsible that he never regrets it for a moment. And the money really did come pouring in. My friend of mine said once he read that line, he got out his checkbook and he was ready to hand it over. And of course, I was terrified. It was my first trip abroad alone. And my neighbor and friend Jim drove me to the airport in Seattle. I was so scared, I was quivering. And we got to the check-in line at to board the plane. In those days, you could actually go with the person to the line to get on the plane. And I said, Jim, I couldn't even speak. I can't do it. How am I going to live? I didn't have a place to stay. I didn't have anything planned. I had nowhere, nothing. And I just didn't know how I would survive. I said, I can't do this. And he looked at me and he said exactly the right thing. I don't know where he came up with this. He said, all right, I'm going to make you an offer. I will give you $1 million tax-free. But if you take it, you have to agree never to leave this country for the rest of your life. I looked at him, it snapped everything into focus. I said, okay, get out of my way, I'm getting on that plane. And it was a wonderful time. I had a great adventure with stories I still tell to this day. Came back, did a lot of different things. I ended up living in Germany for 3 years, doing my doctorate at Oxford, living in England for 3 years, traveling across Europe, much of the time on my own. I think I've been to 30 or 40 countries at this point. Russia, I lived in briefly, the Balkans, spent a lot of time in the Balkans on separate occasions, and really had just compiled a lot of great times and adventures doing the things that made me happy, knowing I had to follow my heart, not do what other people thought I should be doing. So flash forward to New Year's Day 2014. I'd been teaching in the US for a number of years. It had been a while since I'd been out. I knew I needed a break from the old routine, so I figured right after New Year's, I just called up and bought a ticket to Japan, as usual, with no plan, no schedule, no place to stay, knew no one, didn't know what I was going to do. Figured I'd figure it all out after I got the ticket. And as the weeks for that trip approached, guess what? I was scared all over again. I was nervous. How am I going to survive? What am I going to eat? How am I going to find food? What will I do? But the truth is, I was a lot less scared this time than I had been years before. And I knew that nervousness was okay. It's going to pass, and once I'm in it, I'll figure it all out. Yeah, I did a lot of planning for this once I had to, but then I also had to do a lot of thinking on my feet and figuring things out there. And it all worked out. It was a great time, and I'd love to tell you, if you wish, about those adventures. But someone once pointed out to me that courage is not about the absence of fear. Courage is about being afraid, but facing that fear with resolution. Yeah. And that courage for blind people, that ability to face our fears, comes, I think, from not just having proper skills, but also having a lot of self-confidence. And that self-confidence comes, in large part, from people very much like you. It comes from the teachers, and we're all teachers in one way or another. The teachers who are willing to devote a huge part of their lives to dramatically enhancing the lives of others. So I really have to thank you for your willingness to do this every day. Thank you so much for your time.